Momentum is key. There's a reference here to sharks having to keep swimming, moving forward. At some points of this programme, progress was incredibly slow. You could almost needed a microscope to measure it. And at other points, it was incredibly fast. In 2018, we did 3/4 of the whole rollout to job centres in 9 months, having spent the previous 4 years doing the first quarter. So it's not linear, but you need to try and find ways to keep moving forward.
Welcome to the Westminster Tradition, a podcast with lessons for the public service. I'm Alison Lloyd-Wright, Managing Director of the Good Trouble Group, and I'm joining you from Kaurna land. With me, as always, are my two fellow recovering public servants, Managing Director of Good Government Advisory, Danielle Elston.
Hello, Alison.
And Caroline Crozer-Barlow.
Hello, Alison.
Today we are completing the second of a two-part series on universal credit, which seeks to ask and answer how we can still do big things, big reforms. Especially when, as we finished up in the previous episode, there's a bin fire, a proper bin fire. But Caroline, you promised us a happy ending, so what happened next?
Excellent. So we left, they've made the big promise, they're going to simplify benefits, they're going to make it easier for people to get off benefits into work, and they said they're going to do it in 3 years' time. And it turns out 3 years after making that promise, things have gone terribly. So what happens in 2013 is they do something called the reset. And you know it's serious because even when people write about it in their documents, they put a capital R. That is a capital R reset, people. And as part of that reset, they actually don't have to sack anyone because for various sad reasons, they kind of keep losing senior responsible officers, SROs, including one who gets very sick and another one who dies. Like it's really quite awful. So they don't have to sack anyone, but they do sort of say, this has not been working. They bring in some new leadership and they adopt a twin track approach. So this is interesting. If you recall, they spent £400 million on ICT.
That bit I remember.
Yep, do recall.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And they had built a kind of very basic bit of the system. Like, you know, there was the unemployed man in Sheffield could do it, but no one else could apply for it because it didn't work for anyone else. They kept that. And they kept that for a couple of reasons I'm happy to talk to. But they kept that and they called it live surface. And so they stopped developing more ICT on it, but they use what they've developed. They use their $400 million, which means they don't have to write down the asset in the balance, which is quite important. And they start to use it as a real trial of actually what happens when you interact with clients and you're trying to go through this kind of simplification process. So they call them pathfinders, and they actually start to test the process of moving people from these 6 benefits to 1 benefit. Not the back end, the front end. What do they need? What kind of help is useful? What happens when you start doing this?
Human-centered design. What?
Wackadoo. And so I heard one great stat where they're like, essentially it takes us like 150 humans in the public service to give the universal credit to the 25 recipients who at one point are doing it. Because like they have to, like they're doing it all by them. But they learn really important things, right? So the first thing they learn is that lots more people are breaching the conditionality, like essentially, you know, the stuff where we make people kind of go off and apply for jobs. Lots more people are breaching the conditionality in this new system than were in the old system. And so they go and try and work out why are all these people tripping over. Exactly. I can't remember. It's like an answer about, you know, whatever. But they work it out and then they fix it so lots less people trip the condition. Crazy. And the second thing they work out is that landlords in social housing are very uncomfortable with universal credit because before the money used to go directly to the landlord and now it goes to the person in this big chunk of money.
And so they're very scary for them. Yeah.
Exactly right. And so they come up with some kind of pathways for like solving it. So there's the live service. It's hiding a $400 million write down, but it's also doing some useful stuff. On the other hand, they get together in what sounds like a kind of Google office with beanbags and like foos tables and whatever. They bring together a little multi-D team of people from the Cabinet Office digital section. They sound very cool. People who've worked in DWP offices, policy people, like everyone in together. We're going to do this. And they do I'm going to use words that I don't know, agile methods to build a scalable, claimant-facing digital platform. Essentially, they restart the tech build entirely, right? And they do this over time, building in the lessons they're learning from the live service. They keep the live service running until 2018 when they transition fully to the full service and just kind of can the rest of the live service. But they've got 5 years out of that £400 million, and so things are going pretty well. I think that's kind of crazy. Like, they only did it to save face and make sure they had something before the election. Like, that's why they kept that live service going, and yet they made it useful.
Not just useful, like arguably it gave them some integral. Yeah, arguably it gave them a design pathway that maybe they hadn't been thinking about first. And what's striking here is that the kind of the fixer-upper turned into actually a better way of working.
Yeah.
Which was, shockingly, like, let's talk to the people using the system and understand their experience of using it and work out where they're going to trip up.
Yeah.
This makes me really wonder whether we have a set of assumed steps when it comes to big reforms that are not always in the right order. So vision, great idea, and then we have a program and a project, and then we do procurement. And then once we've spent £500 million,
and we talk to some people.
Look, the £500 million bit's
That's when
unfamiliar.
we talk to people.
But that's when we start talking to people. And I'm just listening to this makes me wonder whether the big idea needs to, like, whether the step before the procurement and all those things is actually end user work well before you start testing things. It's about that connection to how things really work and that multi-D team idea. Like, how come that wasn't stood up at the beginning? I'm not having a massive crack at it. Like, the way they did it was the general way in which we do massive reforms: idea, legislation, the stakeholder engagement on the vision and the idea, and then once you get the go-ahead, you disappear from the peeps again until you can stick some of them in for some user testing if you're lucky. Maybe that's part of the kind of...
And like, we are being cheeky. I'm sure they talked to some humans at some point along the way, right? But you're right. You know, agile, Caroline, you know, claiming not to know what it was before. It's like a specific methodology of ICT projects, project management and design. But that starts with the user, I suppose, and that, at risk of using a phrase I don't like particularly well, seeks to kind of co-design it in incremental phases with people who are actually going to use it. It sounds like that's sort of how they ended up doing it in the fix-up.
It is. And it's funny, as Danielle described back, like, where the process went wrong, I think, and we'll get to this in the next bit where I talk about how they kind of did this, like what the kind of culture was. But I don't know that you can do the user testing and then go to procurement because of the iteration, right? And then I'm like, so why don't we do the iterative? And part of why we don't do the iterative is because we worry about knowing how much money we're going to need to allocate, right? Like, we don't like saying we're going to build this system, but I can't tell you, is it $500 million or $1 billion or 2.3 billion, as this was once going to be.
That's a recipe for Treasury not to approve.
That's exactly right. And so how do you shift that? Like, I've always been a huge fan of, give me an envelope and I will deliver you the best reform I can within that envelope. Like, you know, year 7 to high school, they gave us $14 million and they're like, make it as good as you can. And we handed some back in the end. But it's like, right, excellent. I will go and talk to people and they will know they can't ask for the moon, and we will work out together what the best bit of the spend is, and they'll understand what I'm trading off here and there. And I just think there's something about that. But you have to have a lot of faith in your leader, and you have to have a minister who's happy to kind of go with that, which is always tricky as well, hey?
I also think there's this thing here, and we talked about it in the earlier episode, and it's something, you know, I've run into in my career, and I know you guys have as well, which is that, like, the people who do policy reform, by and large, are what I would call kind of big picture, conceptual thinking word nerds. Who didn't study engineering or computer science, and think that think that there is like a distinction between the concept of the reform and then the in bracket, in quotation marks, ICT project. And so the reason we do it the way we do it is we're like, okay, well, we've designed what it needs to do, but we couldn't do that. We need to give it to an ICT team, and they're going to make it do that thing. And it's almost this like total handball of responsibility to say, go away and build this thing that we've sort of conceptually designed.
There's a great line in one of the I will recommend this pod, actually. It's an event that was held by the Institute for Government, and it talks exactly about this recovery period we're going to talk about. And one of the people says, it's like we think that in these big complex policy reforms, if you're just smart enough, you can write down what's needed and then that's it. And I really feel that. Like this is the Kim Little high hubris, high concept, right? Like if I'm just smart enough, I will be able to put down all of the words on the paper that say this is exactly how this should work, and then some
ICT often will
make that work.
Turn it into a thing. Yeah.
It's very Cartesian duality here,
yes,
right? Like
that's
it's
what
very
I'm trying to
mind
get at.
body.
Yes.
Yeah.
But this is, I think this is because we haven't really, like, half our reforms now are actually ICT projects. That's what they are. And yet, like, we still have it over there on the other side of the road, and we expect them to come back 3 months later after we've given them the money and give it back to us kind of thing.
And then we're aghast when it doesn't work the way I wanted it to work.
Yeah.
Yes.
So tell us about the fix. Tell us about what that looked like.
So if you're going to kind of summarise exactly the change that happened that made this work, is they went to something they call test and learn, right? Like so they moved from a pre-design deliver to a test and learn iterative process. And they do that both by having the live and the full service, and also in the full service design they're doing a whole bunch of testing and learning again. And there's lots of stuff on the test and learn stuff that I will post to in the show notes. One of the things that's really clear about test and learn is you need multi-D teams, you need to put policy, ops and digital together, you need show and tells with ministers. You can't just do green, amber, red. Like you need people to both know what you're asking for, but David Freud makes this point, like make the million different policy decisions that actually those ministers care about is land tax in, council tax out. Make them get in on the ground of those so that they understand, and so you don't get to the end and everyone's like, but I thought you were going to do TV license fees through the post office, which was definitely one of the things. Anyway, so that's like a cultural thing. There's psychological safety where people actually say hello, actually say what's going on. Neil Coulson, the SRO, talks about he made one decision in the 10 years where he said this is what's happening. He never viewed his job as decision making.
Interesting.
He never viewed his job as telling people what to do. He viewed ministers' jobs as decision making and the program director as like making the decisions about how to make the thing happen. His job was, are we aligned to our North Star? Do we have the culture that makes sure we're learning and testing as we go? How do I keep people who might be unhelpful helpfully engaged? Like it's fascinating.
Yeah. How do I facilitate, make sure that everyone has the resources they need and the interesting.
Yeah. And that was his full-time job, right? Like I find it crazy that the senior responsible officer, like the sponsor, the project sponsor, since when do we ever let a project sponsor of a major reform have that as their full-time job if they're not the ones doing the FTE allocation and the Gantt charts?
Yeah.
So yes, so I thought in particular we might talk a little bit about managing up, because I do think it is part of, I think that way of working is very consistent with how millennials and Gen Z want to work, right? So I actually don't think it's a
100%.
huge challenge to get people working like that. I think the challenge is getting the leaders to let people work like that maybe.
Create
Pause on that. Do people agree with that?
Yeah. I do.
I don't think everyone loves working like that. I think there are still people who like really firm boundaries and not working to a North Star in the sense of no, I can't do your astrology and your astronomy.
It's astronomy, Danielle. I don't watch reality TV and I don't believe in astrology, but thank you.
She does watch Master Dogs though.
It's so true.
But
I watch quite a lot of reality TV.
There are, there are people who just like to know what like the street light at the end of the street is, and that's their remit. So you'd be looking for a particular type of people, but I definitely agree that's like what we're going to see in generational shift is less of that and more of the other.
Yeah. And I think they had a very young workforce as well. Like I think they skewed young on this project. So Neil Coulson, the guy from the SRO who lasted a decade in this role, he kind of has like lots of lessons, but I think there were 4 that stuck out to me and I thought you guys would like.
And I'm interested in them, but first I want to say he was a decade in the role, right?
That's
like,
what, yeah.
Compare that to robo-debt and this and all the issues that we've heard about in various public sector reviews of kind of senior leaders on the make for their next better senior position. And the fact that he wasn't or didn't has to be actually part of the factor here.
100%. And part of why he lasted so long is literally he was unsackable, right? Because they'd had the kind of 6 in 4 years. And so even he confesses like it would have been very hard to sack him because like whatever. And so then partly he's unsackable and partly he stays, I think because unlike robo-debt, the work is nourishing and like adding value and you'd really want to stay on this amazing project.
Yeah, fair enough.
That's right. Yes, but agreed. There is something incredible about the longevity. Incredible. So here's 4 lessons. Avoid the tyranny of the timetable. Like he thinks timelines are the worst part of anything and they destroy being able to test and learn because you kind of pretend like you. So there's that. He says negotiate hard when the scope changes, which I loved. Like he's like every time the minister would come and say, also the Chancellor's given us another $4 billion of savings to come in. He's like, sure, I'll need another year. Like he just, he negotiated really hard. He made sure he got resourcing to deal with it. And because they wanted the thing, like that worked. He says don't fake certainty to meet political narratives, and he's saying that to his boss, right? So don't lie to your boss about how quickly you're going to be able to deliver. And he has this great story where he told IDS right after the 2015 election, which the Tories won in a canter, which was a bit of a surprise. He said to IDS, yeah, I'm not going to be able to deliver it on this timeline. And the minister did not talk to the SRO for 3 months. It was just like so cross about it.
In the freezer.
In the freezer, did not speak to him. But at the end of the 3 months, IDS comes back to him and he says, you should have asked for more time, shouldn't you? Like you should ask for more time now, as in I haven't given you enough now. And so that really worked. And then his last one was momentum is key. Like you have to keep delivering something, otherwise people believe nothing is coming. So what do you reckon of those?
Oh,
it's a good list, right?
It's a good list. The tyranny of the timetable and the momentum one kind of go together for me. And that is, I think that he's right, but you have to have really, really talented people because the way he's talking about how he was running it does not line up easily with usual models of public sector accountability. So you'd have to really know that things were getting done and you weren't being gaslit by your teams and snowed. Because I think he's dead right. I just am imagining in my head being given some of that freedom and then having to like, how am I sure if I've got a big team especially that things are happening?
Yeah.
I mean, I just think it's really hard and must have required, a steely disposition. The reason the timetable is a factor is because there's a timetable on your minister, right? Your minister is due for re-election at a certain point. And at that point, they want to be able to demonstrate, ideally, well, before that point, they want to be able to demonstrate, but definitely at that point, if not earlier, they want to be able to demonstrate, that they have done certain things. And so, everyone always scrambles around in the last sort of 12 months before an election's called to make sure that the minister has all the things that they promised they would have. So, great, but what a luxury to have And do you only get it by delivering something that's so big and so complicated that you have the authority to say back to the minister, you'll get it when you get it?
So big and so complicated and so baked in, like, yes, they had an ideological commitment to it, but also they needed the savings, right? Like there's a whole other side of this where like it was baked into so many things, it was quite hard to undo. Yeah, I don't know. But I don't know that I'd want everyone working like this all the time. Like I kind of think that seems fine to me, that this is the right level of robustness and pushback on a really big vision. We don't always work on those. Like to Dee's point, like, yeah, if you get the legacy team, but you wouldn't put a legacy team on this work.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's clearly a talented team, and you can see that by the way, like you described it and he described it and that kind of thing. I think the challenge with things that are inevitably going to take a really long time is back to what you were saying, Alison, and I talk about this in health policy all the time, which is punters have to see something. And some things do take a really long time, but we either kind of open it up and show them how far along we are, or we have to have some outcomes that are tangible. So you need a mixed bag in a big reform that keeps that trust and confidence in the short term while you are building bigger things. And so we often then make the mistake of doing one of two things, throwing it out to the implementing quickly and it's not right, or shelving all the longer term stuff and only doing the shorter term stuff. So it's got to be a package, because you can't expect people to trust government to take billions of dollars, lock it up in a room where they don't see a result. I don't even can't trust us in the sense of corruption, but like they've seen enough failed projects to go, I need to see what the hell my money is delivering.
I had this.
Oh, good.
No. I'm going on a weird journey here. I had a lovely conversation with my physiotherapist about treating the symptom versus treating the cause, right? And I was saying, particularly in consulting, sometimes people bring you in because they've observed a certain symptom and they want you to fix the symptom, but actually, unless you fix the thing that's causing the symptom. And so I was sort of, high and mighty, laying face down on the bed about fixing the cause over fixing the symptom. And she just said, like, yeah, but as physiotherapists, like, it's our observation that unless we fix both, people don't believe you've done anything, right?
Yes,
like, unless you've actually made progress on the symptom, you could have fixed the cause, but unless they really feel like that was the part where they observed
I'm not going to stick with the long-term planning of my exercises every day because nothing's getting better, and so I'm not getting the dopamine I need.
Yeah. And I think, like, I've thought about that conversation a lot in a public policy context since then.
It is such a good point. It's such a good point. And as long as you don't preclude things, like thinking about your health example, right, Danielle, I think I've expressed the ill-informed, because I don't really know anything about it, view that I don't understand why the Commonwealth government is building GP super clinic ED sort of things. Like I feel like there's a kind of weird, no one's quite sure who should be doing what. But actually people need GP super clinics and
they've got the money, so who got do
That's right. And as long as you're not saying this is our forever answer, you could learn heaps from those GP super clinics, right? Like you can learn, okay, what happens to usage? Like actually how do these work when they're working well? How much does it cost to run one of these things? And if you end up getting the right structure of whatever, all of that is incredibly important information for your next reform. So you're doing both, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure my views on urgent care clinics need to be
publicly ventilated.
But I think a similar example is if you throw $1 billion at bulk billing across the board, people are like, yeah, well, it should be. Whereas if you open an endo clinic and create a new asthma item and people can see themselves in the investment and the program in the same way they would have got if you had increased bulk billing across the board. The problem is this goes back to the politics versus the policy purism. And so you end up with an MBS that gets increasingly complicated because you can't just go to the doctor and have it paid for by the Commonwealth for them to just sort out, trusted on their own basis, whatever it is that you need. Yeah. We need to continue to announce that you as a special person, whether that's because of a particular condition or age or whatever else,
That's true.
is understood by this government health system. And so I think that's what I'm getting at in relation to a mix of I can see it and feel it right now. So when you create long items for particular conditions, you are not doing you are kind of playing with the MBS to deliver a single tiny outcome. But the problem is you will actually probably not get thanked if you do anything wholesale anyway. So you've got to do a little bit of both to keep the people on with you.
And as long as the little bit that you do doesn't create contrary expectations or perverse incentives that drive you further away from your North Star, right? Like, so
yeah,
I think this is a lesson I'm taking from this conversation, Danielle, is like, I'm all about opportunistic, but now it's like, how do you make sure the opportunistic builds towards, in this case, a vision of it's good to have people back into work. We should be investing money in getting people connected to work. That's the thing. Like, how do you make sure what you're doing is connecting there, not increasing a sense that actually every special category needs its own special thing? Like, that's, that would be an unhelpful thing to spend lots of time on if that's what you're going for. Yeah.
And this is where my rampant cynicism is. I think for some things there is no North Star, or no one's bothered to like spend the time and energy to say, what is this system for?
Yeah.
Where are we going?
Yep. I find it gobsmacking because actually when you start talking to people, often the North Star in their heads is so kind of implicit that, like, when you say it out loud, you sound like you're saying stupidly obvious things.
I was just going to say, like, Alison, you must have the same experience in relation to strategy work, which is everyone think like, so exactly that, which is when you say, is it like this? And you think, oh, goodness me, is this going to come out at a really, and everyone's like, that's genius. I'm like, oh, actually, it's really interesting that you are so busy in your my purpose is to please the minister, my purpose is to come in under budget, my purpose is to
deliver the program
or whatever, that the very simple what you're actually here for
articulation of strategy,
is not there, and it's
what
not
you're not
as
here
complicated as you think.
It's not. It rarely is, but some programs and departments struggle to articulate it.
Yeah. Still needs to be midwifed often by fresh eyes. Hey, Alison.
Okay,
so we've gone on a typical tangent. Bring us back, Caroline.
Okay, so they've got this fancy new test and learn process. They've got the live service that's testing things. They've got the full service with the beanbags and the pizza eating that's building things, and everything's going well. Worth saying, through all this period, and in particular from 2015 on, when there's a Tory majority, the UC, the universal credit, is subject to increasing amounts of austerity. And this is where, like, if you look up universal credit now, no one actually talks about like the successful implementation of a giant welfare reform. Everyone talks about the really tight ass and hard decisions that were made in relation to austerity that weren't about simplifying and tapering. They were just about taking money from poor people. So you see this in particular in March 2016 in Duncan Smith resigns. So he's absorbed a lot of savings into universal credit, but he gets asked to do one around cuts to personal independence payments, which are disability payments. And he's like, well, this is stupid, right? Because the point is to try and support people to live meaningful and fulfilled lives. And we're literally just taking money from people that will force them to lead awful and small and very, very poor lives. And so he resigns. I'm unable to watch passively while certain policies are enacted in the name of fairness when it is simply not true. Woohoo,
Sometimes
RDS.
Resignation speeches. Anyway, I have a thing for resignation and election loss speeches. They're sometimes the most articulate.
Yeah, because they're saying exactly right. Like, they're like, this is the truest version of the thing, and I made a whole bunch of compromises along the way, but this is the core. So he resigns. He criticises Treasury and George Osborne, the Chancellor, in particular. And it's fair to say it's also against a backtrack of long-standing political tensions. I don't think IDS and George Osborne got on super well. Like, whatever. interesting is that his resignation saves UC from having to do the next round of savings. And in particular, because those PIP savings were never actually going to save a lot of money. They were just like PIP. They were just mean. They were just mean-spirited, punishing people to show that, like, you know, poor people don't get anything more than the rest of us, kind of stuff. So that was his resignation was very useful, very, very useful. However, the context of austerity in general means that the program, which has kind of been getting better, is under attack all the time. Like in the parliament, there's like endless parliamentary committees saying, you know, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that. And what I find excellent is that the Senior Responsible Officer, Neil Coulson, talks about how they got back into their bunker mentality. So they've been in the bunker in 2013. Then they built this great culture and they did the hippie Google thing, blah, 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 hipster Google thing, blah, blah, blah. But as they get the criticism, they go back into their bunker. They stop listening and they start being defensive and they start closing up shop. And what is so impressive is the National Audit Office comes to them and says, hey, guys, like, remember that thing? You're doing it again. And they changed. They reset their relationships with people. They were like, okay, we can talk to all the people who are criticising us on policy and still talk to them about how this works in practice. And so they start a really active process of stakeholder engagement. And so again, like, this is one of these moments where it really could have gone differently, very challenging to deliver, welfare reform in austerity, incredibly challenging. And they managed to get it through a kind of moral integrity and a kind of process moral integrity, I guess, maybe.
Interesting.
I think it's one of the things I think is interesting is the audit office being so proactive, right? Like instead of receive the thing, of do the thing, finish the thing.
Write the turdy email. Yep.
Yeah. Like that I think that
write a turdy report 5 years after the program wrapped up. Yeah. Right.
So I can then write a turdy response to your turdy report and we can just keep, I
can also understand, it's so funny, until you said that, I've always, like the bunker mentality, the fortress, and I think, you know, most public servants will have a name for fortress-like places. It might be the name of their building or whatever else.
A certain
it's not
basement.
Uncommon. But I've always thought it was culture from the top and all of those things, and I think that's true. But something that occurs to me is how much we wrap around places when they're being belted from the outside, and maybe they have a reason to feel a bunker mentality. And with so many experts on the outside kind of, I got it wrong.
And they didn't want the austerity savings, right, to say out loud. Like they were not keen to do this bit of the work. Their minister have resigned over it. Like it's not like this is the path they want to be. So, of course, they're defensive.
Yeah, but what do we do about that? You know, like it's just actually a little reminder for listeners, if you are any colleagues who are under fire, even if they're wrong, like wrap around and try and keep them connected to the rest of the world. We've all got a responsibility to like end the kind of it's them over there fire kind of pointing.
Yeah, I had a conversation with a woman who does sort of professional board and directorship, and one of the boards that she is a part of got a bit beat up in the media, and she was really upset that no one had reached out to her, none of her friends, and I was like, oh yeah, because we all like looked at it and went, ugh, that's a beat up, but didn't bother to say like, hey, it kind of sucks to have your name and photo in the paper along with this story that you didn't really deserve. Yeah.
There's that great book, Andrew Solomon, Far from the Tree, which is like how do parents cope with having kids who have a different identity from them. So like their horizontal identity is different from their vertical identity, you know. Oh, have I never pressed this on you? Oh my God, Danielle, you would love it. So it's like,
what is a horizontal and vertical identity?
So like you have a gay child, or there was the chapter that I was very interested in, you have a child with dwarfism, or, you know, you have, anyway, one of the chapters is about you have a child who's a criminal. And there's this line in it that has stuck with me forever where she's like, when your child gets sick, people bring you lasagna. No one brings you lasagna when your son goes to jail. And I have always thought about that and like, in fact, bought someone a lasagna when their son went to jail for this exact reason, because I do think there's something about how do you maintain connection and people are their best selves when they're connected.
Yeah, and that's And that is organisational as well, which until now has never occurred to me. So there's that individual. I mean, when I say organisational, I don't think government can create a find a buddy in the department under fire program.
We could try.
I think it is individual, but it just occurred to me then that, that's how organisations get bunker mentality.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
they've battled through quite a lot and they're still alive, right? This is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
How many years in are we now?
So he goes in 2016. 2018, they reset their relationships with people. What happens in 2020, people?
Can't remember. Blocked it out.
Nothing. I mean, Alison was really lazy in 2020 and did nothing, so she might remember.
Speaking of taking people lasagnas.
So true.
Truly, Danielle's lasagnas and spanakopiters were essential in South Australia's COVID recovery.
So true.
So pandemic
hits. And at this point, they're fully on the new complete service, right? And you can no longer apply for the legacy benefits, like everyone's getting onto universal credit. Pandemic hits. DWP receives over 1 million applications for universal credit in 2 weeks.
Holy guacamole.
Applications in 2 weeks.
Don't you remember the lines outside Centrelink in Australia before they said everyone go home, we're going to fix this somehow?
That's true, yes.
But they were a kilometre long
Before
in some parts of the inner
keeper.
cities.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, you didn't have to go into a centre with universal credit because they had a very fancy online interface. So 1 million online applications in 2 weeks. System holds.
Amazing.
And not just does it hold, they redeploy staff, they do all the things where they get the payment processing fixed. But also, of course, like 1 million policy decisions are being made during COVID, right? So they up the allowance by £20 a week, which, by the way, is about to expire. It's a bit of a controversy at the moment if you're looking into it. They manage, I think they said they were doing 6 to 7 software changes a day during this period, which reflect tweaks to kind of, settings and how things work. Completely fine. Absolutely no problems. So the system isn't perfect, just to say, people will tell you it's a bit clunky or whatever.
That's a pretty good test, though, yeah.
Exactly right. It's stable, it's adaptable, it's durable. And now now the argument is about, have you got the policy settings right? Not have you got the architecture of linking people to work in this way and universal credit does this. No one's talking about that. We're now talking about what optimizing for better.
Which presumably will be much easier to implement now.
Exactly.
If they wanted to make a policy shift, it will presumably not take as big a project and all of that kind of thing because they've kind of built it for agility and simplicity in some ways.
18 months previously to change any setting in your welfare system, 18 months. And we know this. We work with Services Australia and stuff. If you make a change to childcare subsidy, which they did at the end of last year, won't be implemented until 1 July this year because it takes that long to kind of build the thing, right? This in the days. They are literally doing it in the days. So they have... You're exactly right, Daniel. They've not just changed kind of the expectation in the system. They have changed the ability of government to make choices in a way that actually responds to the timelines of people's lives and of the world's life. Wild.
I want that. Gimme.
And so in thinking about this, Caroline has prompted us with perhaps the most profound question that has ever appeared in our show prep notes. What does success really look like in major reform? Outcomes, longevity, or cultural change?
All of them, and I'm now going to So I'll go to longevity for a minute, which is longevity is a result of cultural change in some ways. I think about the last election and the Prime Minister waving the Medicare card around and the attachment to that system and service that Australians feel in the same way that in the UK it's the NHS. That is a reform that is successful, that was very contentious, and its longevity is because of cultural change, because of the cultural change, not so much in government, but what people's expectations were and their relationship to government. And so I think longevity does have something to do with what success looks like, in the sense of you keep iterating, because, I mean, this will still be successful if in 15 years' time they do major welfare reform using this simplified architecture. So that longevity is still a part of, I think, what success. I think it's the least likely answer. I mean, outcomes is kind of the most obvious answer, and I do think that's what success looks like. Otherwise, what are we all here for?
Ooh. So
say more, Alison.
No, so I did this really interesting cultural diversity training that the valuing of outcomes is like a very Western value, right? Other cultures value relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you didn't achieve an outcome, but you made a stronger relationship. And this is where I kind of think it's got to be some combination of longevity and cultural change, but a bit like the physio discussion before, you've got to do something about the pain in the shoulder for people to want to come with you on the rest of that journey.
I agree with all of those statements. For me, actually, and it's really crystallized in these discussions, what I find amazing about universal credit is not the kind of new system or the new whatever. It's the shifting of the Overton window from a system where welfare does one thing to a system where welfare does another thing. And that is enduring. And Danielle, to your point about Medicare, I remember, so my grandfather was I think he might have been the vice president of the AMA in South Australia at some point. I remember my mum telling me that he was very opposed to Medicare and he thought of it as the socialisation of medicine. And as a young lefty teenager, I was like, how could he think that? Anyway, but
It was.
It was.
Anyway, keep going.
Well, no, and now I look at now I begin to understand the different ways in which it has completely changed our relationship with medicine.
Mm.
But also it's changed, to your point, GPs' relationship with their practice of medicine. It's changed so many things, but no one would ever even think about it has shifted how we understand the problem because it's completely shifted the architecture on which we've built our solution set. And so what is amazing about this is it kind of did that.
Yeah. What does it take to make that the norm and not the exception?
Oh, God, I don't want it to be the norm. I'm so conservative. I don't think we should make big changes lots of the time.
I think we're going to be very challenged. I mean, we hang around with a lot of young people, the three of us. I think
involuntarily.
I like hanging out with young people.
Okay, it's involuntary for me. Okay.
I think we're going to be very, very challenged by what the next generation of big thinkers think about incremental reform. I'm an incremental reformer. I still like to do something in 5 months that makes lives better for 25% of the cohort than do something over 10 years that may never finish and may never make anyone's life better. Mm-hmm. That's about as Gen X as you can get, I think. And so I think we're very challenged by the rethinking of fundamental service provision, fundamental norms, expectations, etc., by the next generation. So in answer to your question about making it the norm, whether it's right or wrong, Alison, I think we're going to have to face making some of this stuff the norm, whether we're ready or not.
There's a generational cycle about revolution, and Gen Z and Alpha are going to be our revolutionary generation.
I agree.
Which is why I think, the thing I really do buy into this, so there's the North Star Overton window. The test and learn is the thing that I have really taken as a practical thing that I think you can build into every project, right? It doesn't require grand vision or purity. Testing and learning, and it just requires a bit of courage and an ability to say we mightn't get this right the first time, but the more we do it, the more we do it. And that's why I wanted to talk about universal credit, because I do want to encourage all my friends in the policy world who I'm hassling about various big reforms, the more we do it, the more we do it. Let's test and learn and do some stuff and move a bit closer.
Yeah, locking yourself in a tower while you try and figure it out on your own, not a good idea.
Bad.
Well, let's leave it there then, shall we? Before we go, I'd like to thank Little Miss Ling, who sent us the most beautiful and thoughtful email from possibly one of the funniest email addresses we've ever seen. So we'll be in touch to send you a mug. Till next time.
You ask people on the team, what outcome are you what are you actually trying to do here? They'll say, well, I'm trying to deliver this system, or I'm writing this policy. That's not an outcome. More people who more work more of the time, protecting those who can't work, I can still remember it. That's the outcome for universal credit.
Just some appropriately bureaucratic disclaimers. While we've tried to be as thorough in our research as busy full-time jobs and lives allow, we definitely don't guarantee that we've got all the details right. Please feel free to email us corrections, episode suggestions or anything else at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Thanks to Pampot Audio for our intro and outro music. Till next time.